All right, I think I'll do it. So we are honored to be joined by Ursula Wolfe-Rocca, an educator and editor at Rethinking Schools, a great organization that everybody should follow. Ursula, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, especially with a lot going on in education in the United States. And we wanted to talk about sort of this uproar over critical race theory and the sort of weaponizing and the right wing sort of trying to combat it. So, Ursula, can you give us just an understanding about what this sort of manufactured crisis is and why this outrage machine is churning like it is right now?
Well, that's a great question. The laws themselves kind of use different terminology. Some of them refer to critical race theory. Some of them have this term divisive concepts. Some of them specifically mention the New York Times' 1619 project. But, they all amount to the same thing, which is an attempt to stop educators from teaching the truth about the past and the present. And why they're interested in doing that is a, profoundly interesting question.
Yeah. Now, Ursula, as an educator yourself, if you could take us into the classroom and just maybe try to paint that portrait of how you navigate something like this.
Well, the idea of trying to teach U.S. history without teaching the concept of structural or systemic racism, which is the language that's included in many of these laws. They ban and prohibit teachers from teaching that the United States is a systemically racist nation. The idea of trying to teach U.S. history absent of that concept is to lie to students. I mean, this is not some sort of PR-driven phrase when we talk about these laws forcing us to lie to students. This is simply facts, right? We are being told that we can't teach that the United States Constitution, by encoding protections for enslavers, created a systemically racist system. And to not be able to teach that is to lie to children.
Yeah, and Ursula, I'm just wondering, obviously, there already is a sort of, in textbooks, a sort of whitewashing, if you will, of American history. You've seen that in some Pearson textbooks. I came across a story from Texas a few years ago where one teacher had an exercise where you had to lay out the positives and negatives of slavery, which is insane to me in these times. So, I mean, when you're looking at these textbooks, do you solely rely on those, and then you sort of use your own understanding of history, or are there other resources out there that help you and other educators inform these young students?
Right. Well, first of all, our motto at the Zinn Education Project, which is a project of Rethinking Schools, is to teach outside the textbook. So what is, sometimes the right creates strange bedfellows. Today, I was just reading, a proposed statute in Florida that is calling for the banning of a textbook, which is normally, right, the the target of my critique. But even the textbooks are too radical for these right-wing legislators, which really tells you something. But yeah, I mean, our goal is to get teachers to be teaching outside the textbook, to be teaching, a history that focuses on folks who tend to be marginalized in the textbook, and also grassroots efforts to, make the world a better place, both those that have been successful and those that haven't. And getting back to your, first question, it's like, what is driving these attacks? I think there's something there. I think that when students learn a complete version of US history, they get explanations about why the world is the way it is, and they also get models for how to transform it. And if you're a protector of the status quo, that is something you want to keep out of the, hands, hearts, and minds of young people.
Ursula, I have a question. I surreptitiously snuck into a clubhouse room that was a civil discourse between both sides, people from both sides of this topic. I found it interesting. Actually, there were a few, and some of them were, all hell was breaking loose consistently. But this was actually somewhat civil in that the anti-critical race theory, proponents were civil and calm and nice, and seemed like they were pleasant folk who had just very simple, concerns. To play sort of a devil's advocate to this, they would say that things like this isn't about not teaching Black history or American history in the context of Black Americans and all these things. It's more about the indoctrination. It's more about these other angles that they seem to be concerned about. How wrong is that? And how dangerous is it that they're saying it so nicely, like as if of course nobody wants to be indoctrinated, but that's not really what's happening here, right?
Right. I mean, I think, of course, I'm not interested in demonizing anyone except for the people who are designing these bills with real intentionality and with, I think, very clear goals. But I do think that, for example, critical race theory is a term that's being thrown around, and it is being thrown around precisely to confuse and fearmonger. Right. And make people believe that somehow the goal of educators in classrooms across the United States is to indoctrinate children. The term is, unfamiliar enough that it can conveniently serve whatever purpose the right wants it to serve at a particular moment, right? It's a catch-all for pretty much anything. And so what I am asking, and what I'm asking the press, and what my organizations are asking the press, is to stop parroting right-wing talking points and ask teachers what they are actually teaching in their classrooms and why they're teaching what they're teaching in their classrooms. Because no teacher is going to talk to you using the phrase critical race theory. They may apply the insights when they're talking about school desegregation or voter suppression, but no one's going to use that terminology. They're going to be talking about, we want our students to understand democratic principles and the right to transform one's own society and nation and country. We're not going to be talking about, critical race theory.
I just have one more, and then the gentleman, my colleagues can wrap it up. I work a lot with folks who are sort of in the hip hop education space, right? The integration of hip hop music and culture as culturally relevant pedagogy. These ways of incorporating these ideas in a school. We've seen this works to great effect across many demographics and many grade levels, increasing engagement, involvement, grades, happiness, all the things. I've always wondered, because I work with a lot of them as a journalist and I kind of amplify their work. What do people have in their arsenal on a local level or on a national level to ask education systems, boards of education? I'm a parent, right? I want to have more progressive ideas in my local school district. Is it purely Board of Education local? Is it statewide? Is it national? What can the Secretary of Education do? What can we do to make sure that these ideas are being met with kind of some interest or concern on our parts?
Yeah, that's a great question that I do not have a quick, pithy answer to. But I will say that education is very much like our voting rules in the United States. It is a patchwork. And so in some states, you have a very, very strong Board of Education. Like Florida just banned CRT at the state level, right? And then in many places, you have much more sort of local control. And so I do think, advocating in your local school community is probably the number one thing I would say it's important to do. I just want to add, though, that I think, we have been asking folks to take a pledge to teach the truth at the Zen Education Project. And that's a pledge we are asking every person to take, not just educators, not just parents, but we all have a role in, in education, in educating each other, in educating the young people in our lives. in educating our families and our communities. So.
Yeah, and Ursula, just the last thing for me, this is sort of in response to what some of the people in the right wing are saying, like people like Ron DeSantis, you mentioned Florida, how this kind of education teaches kids to hate each other or hate themselves, right? And look, I don't know if this is just me. You have a history of teaching. When I'm reading about maybe tragedies or struggles that certain groups went through, you sort of gain some empathy, right? You gain empathy
Right.
when you learn about this. Is that something that you see in the classroom when you're teaching your students the histories of disenfranchised or marginalized groups?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is the most, to me, laughable claim that the right is making. They're saying that, that by teaching the truth, we are dividing people and that it's anti-American. And, our answer to that is no. What's divisive? Racism is divisive. What's divisive? The racist wealth gap is divisive, right? What's divisive? Voter suppression is divisive, denying millions of people their sort of fundamental right to vote. So we absolutely think that what teaching the truth does is it, first of all, gives kids an accurate account of how we got here, and it inspires and empowers them to transform the society that they see around them, that they have inherited, and that no one can deny is inadequate to the needs of the moment, right? And they deserve a history that's going to help them make a better world, not one that's going to lie to them.
Yeah, that's great. So Ursula, we really appreciate you coming on. Before we let you go, can you just tell people where they can find more information or resources either through the Zinn Education Project and Rethinking Schools?
Sure. Yeah, so rethinkingschools.org is a place where you can go find our quarterly magazine and lots of books on how to be a social justice teacher in all kinds of ways. And then the Zinn Education Project is zinnedproject.org. And we really encourage everybody to go there and take the pledge to teach the truth, and also learn about efforts by teachers to organize against these bills.